Hey, Tim.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Oh, bad week.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, coughing like a turkey for one night, so I didn't really sleep and seemed to have sprained a bit of chest, rib cage muscle or something.
Oh, wow.
So bit behind. Well, I see you've been busy in your Substack mails and stuff.
Well, yes, I managed to queue up a bunch of things that I am behind on. So they'll start rolling out. I'll catch up with my biography, and then I'll be current with where I'm at on YouTube. I'm actually at about chapter 30 on YouTube, but I was behind on the on actually posting it on Substack. And I've got some other things, so it won't just all be a sort of a one-top.
Okay.
Hopefully, I'll be able to intersperse the biography chapters with other stuff.
So yeah, as I say, there was like 3 mails this week. It was like a 3 week gap before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah. I'd like to kind of consolidate stuff that I'm doing and be more
Get it up and running.
streamline. I've got to streamline them though a little bit because it's sort of a big production to sort of get something moving in each of these things.
Well, we're all slowly gearing up for the World Cup football here,
You're right. Thanks, Matt.
which is in Qatar. So it's like an hour's flight up the road. And well, they did a great job building a load of extra hotels and building the stadium. They were still seemingly short. So there's a lot of people that are coming here, as in the UAE, like an hour's flight away. For let's get close to the football and watch it in the bars and stuff here, and go to the odd one or two that we've got a ticket for. And then some Brit shouted up that I've got 4 nights in a hotel, but I've got 40 tickets. So he's a bit stuck. So he's going to have to go backwards and forwards from somewhere. That said, Saudi has been pushing really hard for like the last couple of years of being a tourist destination. And I'm not quite sure where that's going to evolve to, but we shall see. But it's a strange place in some respects, but it's just another desert town, really, in the sense of, apart from the gambling's not there and the girls and the strip pool that aren't there, and the flashy lights from Las Vegas are not there. It's much the same in many places. It's hot, dry, cold, very, very wet. But another odd one, I suppose. Oh, it must be almost 10 years ago.
I'm sorry.
It must have been almost 10 years ago. We had snow knocked down here at Singapore, a bit further up the hill. Actually, they're not that many hills. There's a few, and they are technically mountains. Right? Sorry, they're over 1,000+ meters. And everybody went crazy, basically. Let's go see the snow. And of course, they, particularly up and down some of the streets, roads, they plant date palms as the street tree because they need less care. But you could see the dark ring under the snow from where the irrigation was pushing out water to the poultry.
Mm.
But you get more of it a little bit further north, so Iraq, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel gets more than you're doing over here.
Had to leave the dog, let the dog out. He'd had enough. Oh, Chris has arrived. Okay, so the plan that we discussed for today was to kind of cover the section that we didn't cover last week, and then the next section. So if that's what we want to do, I believe the thing that we had sort of avoided talking about was this: how extensive is a quality thing, and then the next section, section 6, was sort of, so what do we do about it? So, is that what we want to do?
Yeah, I want to get this broad bit off and up. I think there was quite a bit on at the end of section 5. Quite a bit on errors in the system, fraud in the system, how they audit the system, etc. And there's a whole load of data from all the different programs, and then compared to other places.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, if not last week, the week before, my ex used to work in the housing benefits of the city of Bath.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a unitary authority managing a government level. So in your terms, it's equivalent to Sacramento dealing with the federal program. But because it's housing benefits and the city of Bath is the major landlord in the area, they are paying themselves the value of the housing benefit as they are paying other landlords that are on the system. So the benefiting doesn't even see the catch. It's just, I'm still here and living at number 10. And because automated payments almost, it's not like wage packets in a brown envelope anymore. The money goes directly to who it needs to go to, as opposed to through the clinic. And I was quite pleased to see that at least in a couple of instances when they were going through the detail, they were talking about 60% plus are software errors, input errors, claimant errors, etc.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to
deliberate fraud.
The classic, as opposed to the classic benefit queen that's picked up by Reagan as being, and she's got 17 cards.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the thing that came through to me on that, when I was sort of listening to her moan and whine about it over dinner, as it were, was elements of, unlike saying what I often refer to jokingly as the American intelligence test, i.e. the basket application. They made it as difficult as possible and made it complex, such that how much money do you have in the bank, how much money you earn, what other benefits you, whether they be local, state or federal, what help are you getting from family and friends, who are your dependents, do they live with you or are they off somewhere else, etc., etc. The complexity of the system and the percentages, and of course, because it was a national system, the national government, as in Westminster for the UK, they kept tweaking the system such that for this element we paid 2.5%, and then 1 month, 2 months later, it's 2.25%. So they kept changing that sort of thing. So the people who wrote the software that all these local authorities were using, and there was a multitude of others, a big multitude, a good half dozen. So there's at least half dozen of different versions of the software, all trying to give you the same answer. So if you moved, then you effectively took the details of your file from, say, Swindon Town Council to Bath City Council, and they're using different software. So one's using let's say a Lotus Office suite, and one's using Microsoft Office suite. You don't get the same answer. You get a slightly different, erroneous answer as well. So
are you saying that this is more prevalent in this automated period that we're in than it was previously, or do we just have higher expectations now for accuracy?
I think because it's so easy to change a number in a spreadsheet, equivalent governments and therefore elements of bureaucracies and all that stuff like to continually tweak things such that they're doing something to minimize the cost, or they're doing something to minimize the fraud, etc., etc. Because we found a 17-car loophole or something, and I think there's an element of, if you went back a few years, I mean, I benefit us Brits get regardless, the NHS, right? I only have to pay at source about 50% of my dental costs. I can get NHS glasses for free.
Mm-hmm.
If I've got a broken bone, I can get it sorted and casted for free. I have a heart attack or I need a kidney stone treated, I get it for free. I don't have to do anything. All they want is my name, rank, and serial number.
Mm-hmm.
Done. Right? It was deliberately done like that to take away, which is also mentioned in somewhere in section 5 and 6, is about the upfront cost of applying to having your papers there, and your history and your expectations and your ability to trot along to the office 4 or 5 times to apply, although I think you can now do the application online. But back then, this is pre-2000, basically. You still have to apply in person. And things that you can do online are relatively low overhead. You don't have to go and kowtow to somebody sitting behind a desk. Yeah. And I can remember when I was unemployed in that for about 4 weeks between leaving my school time, college job, and my first proper full-time job. So I applied for unemployment benefit because my college job had been paying my national insurance, which is where the NHS money comes from. The queue and the office space that you have to go and find was relatively intimidating. So, although I don't think that is quite the case so much now, but it's an element of which, although it's been mentioned in sections 5 and 6, I don't think has quite made it to the surface as much as it. And it's a bit like those people that lose their job, don't want to tell their wives and family or their neighbours, and so they carry on going to work for a couple of weeks and disappear across town and sit in a coffee shop or whatever.
Right. So there seems to be a couple of things maybe behind this, right? There seems to be a shift going on as these systems become automated. We also simultaneously seem to be kind of moving toward an economy where, and maybe this is related and maybe it's just coincidental, where we buy things less and we are more involved in subscriptions. Right. And so it seems to me that there's something going on in what you're saying with kind of errors that you mentioned earlier, and then this kind of friction in sort of making these processes work that are a different set of problems perhaps than we used to have when the binary was, can I afford to buy something? Can I not afford to buy something? And it was basically, it was based on it being paid for. I'm going to let the dog out so he doesn't knock out my my plug for my incentive.
Well, I also think that with the various bits of analysis based on data via Luxembourg data and similar, the sheer fact that you take the primary OEDC countries, they're social and 70s, and there's the US mostly below 30. I think of this elements of this back in the day with the newsroom with Jeff Daniels doing his introduction to the program with his 5-minute monologue of the US is topping the list on 3 items only. Number of incarcerated citizens, the percentage of citizens who think angels are real, and military spending, of which they spend more than the next 26.
Right.
25 of whom are allies, I think. The bit that I see missing so far is what's the upside of helping, say, the bottom 10%, the bottom 20% that are still on the productive side. We've obviously got the child poverty bit. The kids are productive in that sense. We've got the disabled people who are, as a lump, many of them are productive or able to be productive, but not all. And you've got those that are seniors. And I thought the 1950s upwards figures, where the social security numbers grew and grew and grew. So now, what you guys call seniors aren't as bad off as they would have been in the 50s.
That seemed to be that did seem to be a big difference. A big change was that the number of old people in poverty was really, really, really pushed down. Yeah. So does that suggest? I mean, does that suggest that the solution to all of this is some type of universal basic income?
Yeah, but so far I don't see yet. Well, I might have missed it, and as I said, I've had to have a couple of days out, and so I haven't finished section 6 to get to section 7. But where's the similar analysis of, regardless of whether you are still on benefits in some way because you're still in a low-paid job, or you're now being paid to go through college or whatever it happens to be, where's the productivity increase in totality such that there's a cost benefit analysis to be done for being more generous, less prescriptive, and less onerous to apply to get to maintain the benefit, etc. So where's the Danish or the Swedish figures to say
Yeah,
those people on benefits for 3 years or more become full playing members of society and pay tax?
Yeah, Tim, is there something going on? Are you in a unusually noisy place today? Because Chris has just mentioned, and I've been sort of struggling to kind of make out your words over the background noise. So we're having a little bit of trouble kind of following your following what you're saying because of all of the noise behind you.
Sorry, I mean it's just the usual coffee shop type stuff.
Oh, okay.
But there's like nobody near.
Like it seems like an especially rowdy one this time around. This is a little bit more than it usually is. So what was the last point you make? I because it sounds to me like what is indicated here, what is suggested here is some type of movement more towards a universal basic income, something that as we become sort of more entrenched in using subscriptions, everything by subscriptions, our phone plan, our rent, and especially in these places, a lot of these places that you've mentioned, I was surprised you mentioned Bath, the percentage of people who are renting, not owning, and that probably is only going to increase as urban populations continue to increase relative to rural. So because we're looking at flows of monies, right? Is that where this argument really kind of, I'm not saying that I think the authors are going there, but even if they're not, is that kind of what's indicated here? And I guess this is a question not only for Tim but for everybody. Is this what we're, is this what is suggested by all of this data and analysis that we've been reading the last few weeks?
I presume that's maybe part of where they're going, but in reading this in concert with David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs and that thesis, and literally this week I'm getting to the part where I don't think he's mentioned universal basic income himself, but he is certainly making the argument that the most necessary people, and I'm pretty sure his book came out prior to COVID, so we didn't see the effect of what we now call like the necessary worker,
right?
Like society doesn't function without you, so we need the teachers, we need the garbage collectors, we need the nurses, right. And he's making the argument without COVID as the necessary backup of his own argument that the most necessary people, even the nursery school teachers, make the least, and they're the most necessary.
Right.
And usually those people are also the ones, I think we saw it in the last month in the UK, there was a strike on the metro lines or the underground
That was Putin's fault.
that threw everything off. And it was, hey, these people are so necessary. In fact, I think even in the United States, there was a threatened train workers strike that got nudged, but then it flared up again almost immediately right after. But it's like, what? There are all these necessary people, but we're paying them nothing. And he cites a study where they, look at the pay versus the social good that comes back from certain types of jobs. So every dollar you pay a teacher, that teacher creates, I don't know what the number was, but let's say 3 or 4 times the value of what you paid them in social goods coming back on the other side. And he compares that, or the study he cites compares that to the good that attorneys create, as an example, which was a negative number, on the whole. And there's some muddiness in the numbers, which he admits and talks about, but I think in a broad general sense, in one of the other indicators he pulled out was people going on strike to prove their necessariness. And he said there was some group of finance people that went on strike sometime in the last decade, and literally nobody cared and nobody noticed.
Nobody
and
noticed.
It was kind of like, you guys can go on strike. Good luck to you. Have fun. We're moving on. And they immediately reversed and came off of strike because they realized they were going to go nowhere. But that's one of those things. And I wonder if, so all this to say, I wonder if now that you've thrown universal basic income into the equation, if some of the economics, and obviously there's an issue with capitalism not working to remedy these issues. Otherwise, we need lots of teachers and we need lots of nurses. And right now there are shortages of both, which is causing, and that's at least a small piece of the inflation we're seeing, is we're needing to pay them more just to keep people in those positions. But we're also not seeing teacher salaries double right now, which means we really don't value them and we underpay them in what is otherwise, sure, capitalism should fix this, or at least if you're a libertarian, that's the presumption, and it's not fixing it, and it's contributing to part of the inflation we're seeing. Although I would suggest that most of the inflation we're seeing is a result of the war in Ukraine and gas prices across the world going haywire.
Diesel is going out of it's going through the roof, and we're running out. Yeah.
So the stuff you mentioned regarding housing seems a good example, maybe of what Piketty talks about. It's like when incomes are just enough to get by, you have to share. So you invest in renting, but that just makes the people who have the capital, who have the apartment houses, that just creates a greater and greater disparity. So the just enough to get by thing often means you're supporting the increase in inequity, because when you don't own your home, of course, you're basically increasing somebody else's capital all the time, just to get by.
Yeah, that David Graeber, the bullshit jobs thing about sort of that, and he sort of did anticipate, I think you're right, Chris, that sort of essential but poorly paid, and he attributed that to well, there's a little bit of jealousy there, right? You're actually doing something meaningful, so you should be getting an emotional that you should be doing it for the, for the increase in self-esteem or whatever that you're getting. And we shouldn't need to pay you as much. Whereas the poor hedge fund manager who comes home and is, or ad exec, right, who is, not getting any fulfillment, needs that extra money. It also, what you said also sort of reminded me of that old bumper sticker. What if they had to, wouldn't it be a nice world if they had to have a bake sale to buy another bomber? Sort of thing. And I think that there's an element of that. Capitalism isn't fixing this problem, although nurse wages have gone up quite a bit. I agree. But, capitalism isn't fixing the teacher problem, partly because I think there's so much institutional bullshit in the way, right? There are some, the way that we've got the public school system in America sort of organized, and the financial flows that are supposed to, property taxes and things like that are supposed to support it, are in the way of, the market sort of reconciling these things rapidly and efficiently, right? So it's partly, so it's partly not a failure of pure capitalism. I would think the libertarian might argue it's a problem of the mixed economy being mixed poorly.
Yeah, there's the other piece of that too is, and particularly in larger cities where there are more options because there's more people. And I am heavily impacted by it living in and around Pasadena. In 1972, we were one of the first two cities that started busing, which then means and I will, make the blanket statement that all the white rich kids start going to private schools. And Pasadena,
or even just open enrollment. So, kids with a car, for example, or parents who can get their kid a car, and especially in high school, obviously, all at once, they can take their car and, drive to a nearby school, which means some other school loses population and loses tuition dollars.
Yeah.
And so you create this.
Yeah. There is a massive and continually growing gap between the haves and the have-nots. So there are private high schools, multiple. In fact, I think there's only 2 or 3 where the tuition is about 10 grand a year for middle schools and high schools. But there are 4 or 5 schools I could send my kid to in the $40,000 to $50,000 a year range in my city.
Yeah.
And to me, that is insane.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guarantee our schools in this area would be far better. And a lot of those private high schools are fundraising as well. And they have development executives with incomes that are greater than a number of top tier colleges that I know of. Don't do this well on fundraising. It's a major problem.
Yeah.
And if we were forced and everyone's feet were held to the fire and there was no private high school, I guarantee that our schools would be 10 times better, not only for their kids, but for all the kids at the lower end as well. But because there's this escape valve in the system, our feet aren't held to the fire to perform on those. And I almost wish there were an extra tax on top of it, that if in the city, private high schools were taxed at a 3x rate for students who were going there. And then you could use that extra money to make the public high schools that much better. It would, at least if nothing, help equilibrate some of those issues.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how these things sort of compound on each other too, right? Because Mark, as you were describing that, I was thinking, well, okay, so you've got sort of this white flight for the people who can afford it, who can give their kids, their teenagers, cars, right? If we didn't do so poorly with public transportation, then going across town to the high school that actually had the program that you're interested in, in an open enrollment situation would be more possible as well.
Well, it's one of those things too. I know there are a lot of, we're in a very progressive space, and I know there are lots of parents who would put their kids in the public high school, but the public high schools are literally so low performing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the scores coming back are like literally 12th percentile,
Right.
which is just abominable.
And not to mention you can get shot.
Yeah.
Well, there's not as big. There are some drug issues occasionally and overdoses and those stories, but we live in an upper crust. Pasadena is not an inner city issue with shooting problems and crimes and gangs at all. Like, we're so far from that. It happens occasionally in the community, but I don't think anybody in Pasadena is worried about being shot by gang crime by any stretch of the imagination, which only serves to even more highly fine line that issue of, it's a great, fine, lovely place. It's so poorly performing that even the people who would like to make the social choice of, I want to send my kids there, literally won't do it. And then on top of that, then they're paying 10 to 20 grand a year for the privilege of not. So those problems not being solved by the market, and I think, to compound it broadly, at least with the Reagan administration, if not before, funding for schools has just gone down precipitously. Since the 70s, at least, certainly by the 80s. So we're compounding those issues and factors by underfunding the schools and not giving them what they need to perform. And it's even screwier in California because of our property tax issue. That your tax is capped at the point you buy the home, and it doesn't increase, so that you're not taxing the elderly out of their homes later in life. But those pots of money then go to the state, which then reallocates them, based on population or other numbers. So that makes it even worse that the local population isn't even paying directly into their local school. It's, going to some other generic pot.
Yeah.
So there are some other compounding factors, but the idea that capitalism should fix this is so totally out of whack that it's actually making it worse.
You bring up an interesting point that I see now across a couple of the books that we've looked at, and that is this kind of historical deviation. It's mentioned in, which chapter is it, where they're talking about social mobility, right? And looking at cross country data, and that things are kind of comparable and all at once. At least in this analysis, the analysis reported about social mobility in the 1980s. The United States just drops off a cliff, and we've kind of seen that cliff. So I never followed history close enough, or political history, to know what are we talking about here that seems to generalize across these various situations, that something happened. And what was it? What was the something? Because this is right. I mean,
nationally,
that's happened. That's come up several times, right? In different issues and different indices. Something happened in our lifetime, and I guess I never paid much attention, that seems to be correlated at least with a number of these, I don't know, I would say systemic failures in the United States. I mean, even if you look at them relative to other countries.
I suspect that it is deindustrialization, generally in America.
So switch from factory based economies to the knowledge economy. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and the movement of manufacturing either offshore or
Okay.
to to Mexican maquiladoras or whatever, where
China.
to China, to to the movement of technology jobs, even I mean even wafer fabrication, right? To Taiwan. All of this, a lot of these, not so much high tech, but right, a lot of these manufacturing jobs, which helped to create the middle class in
Right.
in the wonder years, in that post-war era, from from the end of the Second World War to really the beginning of, well, really to the 70s, right? To the inflation and and low economic, or the stagflation of the Nixon era, and that Carter failed to do anything about, and then Reagan sort of inherited the reaction to that. I would guess that that it's that
So
it's that sort of hollowing out.
globalization, you're saying?
I think globalization, yeah, and I think the hollowing out of the working cohort, the working part of the middle class, right? Because people who had union jobs in a a UAW, kind of a worker in in a General Motors factory, was able to live a middle class lifestyle, right?
Right.
And that
So then the
I think
solution to that was Toyota cars. I mean, the solution is not the right word.
yeah.
The remedy to that for the big money or whatever people was, Toyota or manufacturing elsewhere, or globalization allowed that alternative.
Right,
When
or Toyota or Volkswagen was allowed to open a plant in a right to work state.
right, okay.
Yeah, so that as well. But yeah, I think that I think that people, economists and economic historians have sort of attributed it to things like, sort of excessive consumerism and, buying with credit cards at 24% interest rates and things like that. And, I mean, which is sort of in a sense, kind of blaming the victim, right?
Well, it's another example of the leasing problem. So now it applies to money directly.
Yeah, it
The
does.
people who have money lend it to you, so you kind of make less,
Right.
but you have to use it to get by, and the people who can provide the money just increase their capital.
Right, and you're just servicing that debt. You're actually not paying it off, right? So
Right.
you're carrying huge sort of debt loads. I think the other thing, I mean, it was the case during those, that wonder year period, when, and it was during the Depression. It was around 1932, really, that we started to see a lot of people getting longer term, getting 30-year mortgages, right? Whereas, before before the Great Depression, people oftentimes were buying homes and farms on 5-year loans. So it was a whole different thing. So this creates this opportunity, during this generation and the one following it, and now it's starting to go away, and we're really alarmed, right? That people, that for most Americans, their biggest asset, even if they have pensions and they have IRAs and they have 401ks, is the value of their home. And it's always, and the graph is always going up and to the right, right? So you're just sort of expecting and without thinking much about it, depending on that to be sort of a store of value. And it certainly has worked to the benefit of people who were able to get into owning property early enough, right? My parents, bought a house in a new development in Woodland, outside, between Sacramento and Davis, California. And, and they've almost paid it off now. They've been there 20 years. And, and it's worth an insane amount of money, probably. I mean, they haven't even really.
But friends and family here in the 60s bought a house for about $20,000.
Yeah. And
it is now worth almost $2 million.
Yeah.
I went to somebody needed somebody to co-sign a loan or something. So I went with them and literally, or to sign some paperwork. And we were sitting there, and the finance officer was like, "Oh, I see on your credit report you had something that was a payment of $120 a month, or like $200 a month. What was that? Was that like some small something,
Right.
I know your old car payment or something?" And she was like, "No, that was my home loan.
Yeah.
That it was my mortgage I paid off." And I'm sitting there like, and my mouth is on jaws on the floor because my mortgage is almost 20 times that amount.
Yeah.
Um, and my mortgage is also probably going to be a big chunk of my retirement savings because,
Mm-hmm.
I bought a house 6 years ago almost. And even in the insane real estate space that is Los Angeles, it has almost doubled in price
Wow.
in the 6 years.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, we paid more
See,
than
that's what
$500,000 for
what
it.
Yeah.
that, that's what the Fed is trying to fix now, though, right?
Oh, it's
It-
dramatically, the increase in interest rates is like totally
I mean,
frozen.
what
Yeah.
the Fed thinks the problem is they can make it more difficult.
Well, that's the problem though, is the Fed has one lever and one lever only,
Yeah.
which makes me wonder what the 1,000 people working for the Fed are actually doing on a daily basis. How many people does it take to decide,
Right.
do we raise or lower one number? Because that's literally the only tool they've got in their tool bag. And how many people does it take to decide, does this number go up or down?
Right. And really,
Yeah.
and they're not going to move house prices at all by doubling or tripling or quadrupling interest rates, because the thing that's moving house prices in a lot of markets is, BlackRock coming in and, and buying, and a sight unseen. I mean, up here, northern Minnesota, hedge funds are buying properties sight unseen for 120% of the seller's asking price. So it's ridiculous. And I think this is, yeah, I mean, now we're talking about kind of really, really not something that's going to be felt by the next generation. I think this is a new kind of a change. But yeah, I mean, I was, when I was I guess I was ABD and I wasn't working at BSU. I got a job at BSU accidentally at Bemidji State, sort of immediately after finishing my PhD. And but before that, I was sort of looking around, and my parents were saying, why don't you think about California? And and I had, I had a PhD from the University of Massachusetts, not from Chicago or Chapel Hill or Yale, which would be the places that UC Davis would recruit from. And so and I looked at it, and I responded to a bunch of sort of adjunct and what do they call them, road warrior sort of gigs out there. And it is very much gig work, right? People travel hundreds of miles to adjunct a course at a community college or a state university or something. And I was, and as I was looking at where I could afford to live if I was if I was working, in Mendocino or at Chico State or something like that, it was nuts. Yes. Okay. So in 1980, Pat is saying in the chat. So Reagan's elected, right? Government is bad. He's, and actually before Reagan's elected, right? There's this long-term, I think Reagan's a symptom rather than a cause. And I think that Reagan's elected in 1980, and his opponent is a silly person, right? John Anderson, who is really has no. I mean, he's green. He's like proto green, but he has no kind of national cred. So that was almost the Democrats kind of throwing it, saying, okay, you guys be in charge for a while. And see how that goes. And then they got, I mean, and then I think in a sort of a, I mean, maybe my memory about that is skewed, but I don't remember anybody taking Reagan seriously in the same way that they kind of didn't take Trump seriously. Maybe not quite as extremely, right? Mm-hmm. But it was like, oh, this guy's an idiot. He's gonna screw up. They're gonna go to, we let him be elected, and that'll be the end of the Republicans for a generation. And it didn't work out that way, right? And but Trump was Reagan was capitalizing on and sort of a continuation of this conservative, Mont Pelerin society, kind of what we would now call libertarian, but very free market oriented businessman's reaction to sort of the ongoing legacy of the New Deal, which was the Great Society and all of that. But the other thing that happened too, I mean, if from a finance perspective, I still think that sort of globalization and the loss of jobs, and especially union jobs, is really, really important. But financially, right, we had huge financial problems, because Johnson spent so much on the war that he was ramping up, and also on the Great Society, right? And he borrowed to pay for that. Mm-hmm. Right. So by the time we get into the 70s, we've got and then Nixon, goes off gold. And so there's it's kind of a perfect storm of financial woes. I mean, I remember, interest rates.
Yeah. The 70s really hurt. And then additionally, Nixon in the 70s also shifted agricultural policy in a way that shifted all of the farmland from smaller individual owners to new, larger super farm sites, right? Yep. We're seeing now, which was a massive, massive shift.
Yes.
But there's a really good book by Jacob Packer and Paul, I think, Pearson, called American Amnesia. And they look at mostly 20th century US history, and they trace it, from the early 1900s through the early 2000s. But they kind of look at, and you Dan just mentioned the phrase mixed economy, and you're one of the few people, I think, in 3 years I've heard use the phrase, which also kind of reminded me of it. But they look at our political economy and follow the shift of going from what we would call a mixed economy, where there is both capitalism and government regulation to kind of balance things out in some sense, and look at the shift from that more mixed economy, and we've gone kind of full tilt super capitalism and regulation now, and particularly with Reagan in the 80s, is, it's a bad word. It holds a negative connotation now. Anytime somebody says it's regulation, and it's always framed as regulation for business, which is bad, they kind of also chart the history of the financialization of America, particularly from the 70s on. So now our national product, instead of being that big manufacturing and industrial complex, is now financialization. So companies like Ford is not making money manufacturing cars. It's their finance division is the profit center by selling, the finance part of cars rather than the making of cars itself. So
and GMAC was a pioneer of that. Yeah.
And those pieces all compounded together have made a massive shift, but it's also done a huge number on that inequality thing, in terms of the haves and the have-nots. And then you take that with the kind of consumerization of America and everybody holding all of their, you use your credit card to buy everything instead of your salary that you have. And then that compounding, Graeber's bullshit jobs thesis. I leave my job as a useful, kindergarten teacher or, preschool teacher, which provides benefit to the people around me in the society. I can't make a living on that. So I leave and I go take some bullshit job at some corporation, making 2 or 3 times that just so I can feed my family. It makes things so much harder. So I do kind of wonder if a universal basic income would allow at least those people at the lower end, the trash workers, the nursery school teachers, to, take and keep those jobs and have a supplemental income that then forces corporate America to say, yeah, we don't need all these bullshit jobs. And then, use that as a lever to kind of reequilibrate, our mixed economy with kind of a reverse regulation setup, would be interesting.
Well, and if not by actually providing income payments, the way that that Scandinavians have done it, right, is by actually having the state provide these services. It is kind of interesting that whole that Reagan sort of was able to undo. I mean, even Nixon, right, got of course the Cuyahoga River was on fire and stuff, so he had to create the Environmental Protection Agency, but he also famously said, we're all Keynesians now, right? So there was in kind of serious, which nowadays you might say, sort of deep state professional managerial politics, there was an understanding that that there was a role for government in regulation, right, in doing things, in dealing with externalities that that businesses wouldn't address. Reagan I think that Reagan was obviously smarter than people gave him credit for being initially, but I don't think that he was an in the weeds kind of policy wonk in the way that a Nixon was, or and didn't surround himself with people who were. And that's probably more to the point, right, that that the administration was less about that and was more about like people like David Stockman and and Arthur Laffer and stuff like that. I mean, that was silly economics. That wasn't like
that it's the same type of, if you put it in Kahneman and Tversky's system 1, system 2 framing, where your system 1 is the knee-jerk reaction, your fight or flight response, versus system 2 being, let's really look into this and do some analysis. Both Reagan's administration and to the nth degree, certainly Trump's administration, is let's only have the knee-jerk reaction to the thing. Let's not actually sit and look at and study a policy and figure out what the second and third and fourth order effects are going to be.
Right. And part of that is because what they're doing is they're depending on people who, they know that they can get enough support, right? And they can service the base with these system 1, this rhetoric that comes from system 1.
And it doesn't not affect the left either, because I think that the stories we tell ourselves of inner city urban poverty, which this book says is really the big myth. Throughout the 80s and early 90s, we talk about how the inner city is bad because the urban poor are gonna create crime, and crime is on the rise. At the same time, drugs have been on the rise for 2 or 3 decades, and you have Reagan's war on drugs. So we've been telling ourselves these stories, and then Clinton comes in and does, essentially prison reform and crime reform geared towards drugs that essentially is putting a lot of the urban poor and people of color into the prison system without actually looking and analyzing who is this going to affect. And so here we are, even in a white nationalist framing, like the one thing Trump's administration can point at is let's kind of make some shift to this. And it becomes a bipartisan thing. Like that was a mistake in the 90s. Let's remedy that. And it's because we listened to the story and took the knee-jerk system one reaction to a problem instead of looking at what's actually causing that problem underneath. So, Clinton comes in with legislation and, it's heavily supported by Gingrich and the Congress at the time that pushed that that reform into practice. And it was obviously a mistake, but it's because they're not looking at the analysis underneath, which I think is, 99% of our problem is it's too, especially in a social media, gut reaction. And our gut reactions now are even worse because algorithmic feeds in social media push the extremes. So we're being pushed to be more system one thinkers and reactors rather than let's do some deeper analysis. Whereas the prior media for most of the last century was a more central seeking force. Let's at least look at what the problems are and meet in the middle. And now both our politics and our media are pushing us dramatically further and further apart.
Yeah. I think, and also, and I keep coming back to, and I keep mentioning Gerald Davis, managed by the markets, and the other articles that he wrote. I think that in the 80s and the 90s, right, there's a shift in corporate governance, so that it's more about, even more than it was in the past. It's more about quarterly results, and at the same time, right, we have this increasing professionalization of government administration, of bureaucracy, right, where the bureaucrats are now in this revolving door thing, and especially after after the change in the campaign finance laws, right? But this whole thing where we've got nobody even noticed when Obama brought in all of those Goldman Sachs executives, to solve the problem that they had created, right? I mean, it went undiscussed, and partially that was because of we were already moving into these media bubbles and and filter bubbles and only hearing what we wanted to hear in our media.
There's another kind of compounding effect too that's going to force some issues in the next probably 2 decades. And I think it's probably best illustrated by Amazon recently, who's also, become very anti-union. So you have this managerial class at Amazon, which is probably 5% or less of their entire workforce. I'm not sure what their workforce mix looks like now, but the vast majority of Amazon's workforce are hourly workers who are making deliveries and packaging boxes and shipping things out. But you have that managerial class who literally to the nth degree have trackers on their employees and are watching the level of efficiency. And I think this week it didn't come out, it leaked that their turnover rate is so high within the next few years, they are internally expecting themselves to run out of workers.
Run out of potential employees.
They're tracking their employees to such a degree and managing their time and making it such a poor place to work because your efficiency numbers have to either be good enough or we're going to kick you out.
Right.
and there at least is enough new incoming workers, but that means their turnover is stupidly high. But they're watching to the nth degree the efficiency and the output of their hourly employees, but there is zero, and I have not seen anything or heard anything about watching the efficiency, playing to Graeber's bullshit jobs, of the efficiency of the senior executive staff, and in part because that's a much harder thing to measure. How efficient is the CEO at squeezing money out of life? But you definitely don't see anyone trying to measure any standard of efficiency of middle management at all. Maybe that's the next thing. But
well, there's so much application of silly management stuff, and it begins with Taylorism, right? But now it's Lean Six Sigma, and just all kinds of little formulas for success that we can apply them. We'll change a couple of the adjectives, and we'll just apply it anywhere.
But my guess is if you go into Amazon and you cut out that swath of middle management, you'll save multiple millions a year by not having it, which you can then in turn give to those hourly workers to make them not only happier but more likely to stay. I'll pull up the article, but they internally they estimated that the cost to Amazon of forcing this massive regular turnover in their hourly workers was costing them billions of dollars a year. And when I saw it, I was like, okay, in seeing reports about who they are and how they do business, I presumed that something like this would be going on. But here, evidence leaked that, in fact, it not only was, but was way worse than I would have thought it would have been.
Right.
But then when they pegged a number of what the cost is to the company over time, like I was floored.
Yeah. Well, and it's weird. I mean, it makes sense because they're marketers first, right? That they would be sort of assessing this on the basis of, total available market of potential workers, right? And that seems to be their fear, right? They believe that at some point they're going to exhaust the ability to sort of refill that bucket with new people who haven't been subjected to this degrading work regime yet. I guess they could buy Optimus robots from Tesla.
Well, that's the new issue this week is, Musk buys Twitter, which really at the end of the day, based on what he says he wants to do with it and what he may actually do with it, he's really got an albatross around his neck that's going to cause problems for every one of his other companies politically, both here and especially abroad, because he's going to want to sell Tesla cars to China, to India, to Europe. Right. And his free speech stance on Twitter, he's going to take a $44+ billion loss and have to sell off Twitter, or he's going to have to sell off all his other companies and do something else.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, that may be his better bet, is to sell off all of his other companies for the value they've got and retire with whatever power he can get out of Twitter. But
I don't know.
So
yeah, Pat made an interesting point about Henry Ford. Yeah, so Ford in Dearborn, right? Paying the workers $5 a day so that they could be the type of people who could afford a Model T. Which and when you look at the price curve of the Model T, its entire life cycle, right, was just decreasing price as they generated more efficiencies and economies of scale and stuff. So so that did seem, I agree, Pat, that seemed to be kind of a moment of insight, for and he also, of course, by raising the daily wage to $5 for his workers, he forced every other factory in the vicinity to do the same, and that had a huge ripple effect. Yeah, the other problem. Go ahead. Sorry.
So where we have employers paying effectively a long living wage, as so often pointed out, say Walmart. How true not, I don't care what it's at the moment. If you're not paying a living wage for a basic full-time 45 hour working week, and therefore your employees then have to go on benefits to make rent and food for the month. As an employer, why are you getting such a subsidy on your salary? I don't know. How much is a McDonald's burger flipper paid in the US? Here, because of the way we have no income tax as such, we have a value-added tax on all purchases. It's only 5%, and it's on everything, from a coffee to a house to a computer.
Mm-hmm.
Our burger flippers, or more importantly, most of our food and beverage, all the people, as opposed to the managers or the supervisors, are paid effectively $350 a month, plus housing, plus free food, or at least one meal free.
Mm.
And most of them will have their visa paid for. And because of the way most people are employed here, you get a 1 month paid holiday and you get given a ticket to go home on the basis you think you want to go home. And some people allow the employee to change that. However, there is the start of a social security network here that suggests that the government will pay, in addition to what your employer pays, another 3 months' salary on end of employment.
Mm.
And we have here, there's a 3-year and 5-year rule for normal employees that are not on 1 year or 2 year contracts. At 3 years, there's X amount of benefit, and at 5 years, that benefit is about double.
Mm-hmm.
When I got fired here, American style was coming for a meeting at like 11:30. By 12:30, I was out the door. The HR department miscalculated. I'd been employed for 5 years and 2 weeks. So they had to do a bit of recalculation. But there's an element of, if you wish to be a person in the community, as a company, you're a person, legally you're a person, why would you allow that person to be, in effect, fraudulently claiming benefit? If I'm not paying my workers sufficient to buy rent and food locally,
Mm-hmm.
and have say not much more than an hour each way commute, how are you therefore not a full member of that community? I mean, I noticed somebody piped up about Amazon. Of course, Amazon is a good case for the UK, because Amazon as a company, as a corporate, pays direct corporate tax of very little divided by 2 because they are based for tax purposes in Luxembourg and physically operate out of France, in spite of all distribution centres, etc. And they pay staff, and those staff pay income tax in the UK because they're paid in the UK for work done in the UK. So at what point do we say the company is shirking their social commitment? And I don't mean that they have to pay for their employees' grandma's funeral or a whole multitude of things that some companies do because they're nice. I'm just thinking about I as a company are not a burden on the community.
Yeah. Well, and in a
and
situation,
and I'm not even being clever on things like pollution or other nice things like car sharing benefits, or we'll run a staff bus around town so everybody can come in without having to grab their car or ride their bike or any of the other nice things it could be. It's just that let's be neutral and then work up from there, because there are so many who are not. They're well below neutral.
Right. Walmart is kind of an interesting example in the US because it is because and Mark, you're right, the wealthy do shop there. But Walmart's business model initially, right, was that they would only go into kind of rural towns. Right now they have a new store, that the dollar store that they have in small rural towns, but they would go into rural locations, or they would go to just sort of the edge of an urban location where they weren't competing with head to head with another national brand, a Target, or at the time there were a bunch of national, it was Kmart, there were a bunch of these things, right, that were already in these markets. And so Walmart, kind of built their business model on that. And then they did their logistical thing, and they were sort of, that's why, what's his name, the Harvard Business School guy who's always creating those case studies, did that case study on their, on sort of their logistics, and how they're able to use computerization to account for inventory in transit rather than warehoused inventory and stuff. So they get these actual competitive advantages. But the argument about Walmart is, well, okay, Walmart doesn't pay people enough to live in some of these big markets that they've moved into, right? But what's their role in these big markets, right? Should a Walmart, so if you put a Walmart in San Francisco and nobody who works at Walmart can afford to live in San Francisco, well, then maybe they shouldn't be in San Francisco. Maybe it's not, maybe that is not, maybe in a kind of a strictly, sort of business decision making, free, let markets, decide kind of a way.
Well, in some sense, Walmart doesn't go into those big cities because the cost of the square footage for their footprint is huge. I'm only aware of, in like the metro LA area, there is one Walmart in kind of the broader city, or not the county, but the city of LA. And it's because the square footage and the cost per square footage is so huge. But in addition to that, you literally have so much economic competition that they lose that, because of the cost of the square footage, they lose that competitive advantage that they had in the small towns. So even in the small towns where they're leaving now, they usually also got big concessions from the local city on tax breaks to allow them to be there, but they have written into the contracts when they leave on the lease that none of their competitors can come in and take over that space, which means now you've got this massive big box store that is sitting dead empty in some of these small kind of Rust Belty type towns that then that tends to increase the crime rates and issues. And those tax concessions they have by putting their businesses in there are compounded by the fact that they're not putting taxes back into the community to pay for fire and water and teachers and all the other things that those local governments provide. And I've seen some things on that really I'd like, oh my God, like how could these cities have shot themselves in the foot making these deals to bring them in?
Right.
But then you also have two issues of part of the global supply chain is major corporations manufacturing in the United States are physically making a decision to put operations in the middle of America solely so they can be close to Walmart's central shipping depots. In the 90s, my dad was an executive for Remington Arms and manufacturing shotguns. And unbeknownst to the vast majority, Walmart is the largest gun supplier in the United States. And they specifically looked at right to work states so that they could avoid union issues that were close to Arkansas.
Right.
So they ended up putting a gun factory in Kentucky so that they could be close to Walmart and have easier shipping for Walmart distribution. Solely because of those factors. Like those were the big two, like no unions and Walmart. How do we put ourselves close to minimize costs for those two reasons? So, the Walmartization of America is a massive effect. And that's where, it's where everybody in small towns goes. I remember our small town didn't have a stop and go light anywhere in the city. And the first one they put in was on the highway outside of the parking lot for Walmart so that it was easier to get in and out of Walmart. And then worse, the Walmart decided we'll stay open 24 hours. And they did it as a pilot program to see what would happen because there was a lot of shift work. So it's like, oh, the third shift will get off work and they'll go to Walmart, they'll buy things. And after about 3 months, they realized we're not making enough money to justify the staff and leaving the lights on. But the interesting thing was it became the place to go late at night in small town America. People in the waiting room of the emergency room and admissions into the emergency room flatlined for 3 months. And it was because suddenly, now in this quiet, sleepy town, there's somewhere to go in the middle of the night. You go to the Walmart. So people were going to they weren't buying anything, but they were going there as a place to be. And the only other place in town that was open was the hospital and the emergency room. So if you were bored and there's nowhere else to go, you go there.
We're homeless. It's cold out.
Well, not homeless. Like it was a social thing for the lower middle classes. Like we're bored. There's nothing to do in this town. Like they've rolled up the sidewalks at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and certainly by like 10 o'clock, nobody's out on the streets. So if you're the midday shift worker, where do you go? There's no entertainment. You either sit at home or you're sick. So let's go to the hospital,
right,
to treat whatever the small thing is. But hey, I can put that off because now I can go to the Walmart.
Yeah.
It literally, I saw the numbers at the hospital and it was just stunning.
Wow.
Like this precipitous drop off at the hospital for the 3 months the Walmart was open 24 hours. It just somebody should have done a reporting on that.
Yeah.
But because the numbers were quiet and private and never got out, there was nothing to report on. But these are like the weird, quirky things that happen because of Walmart. You
Mhm.
know, I would
Yeah.
love to see somebody dig into those types of
Mhm.
issues
Yeah.
that, you know, the second and third order effects that nobody watches.
Mhm. In my town, it's a place where people go because they welcome campers. You know, so people who are hauling, you know, third wheels or fifth wheels or whatever they call them, and they don't provide waste services or electrical hookups or anything. So it's not like a campground, but they do sort of say, hey, you can come in here. You can come in and get a cup of coffee and hang out. And
Um, I did have, and it dawns on me now too that it was a thing, but I had some relatives that lived in Johnson City, South Carolina, that had a local Walmart. And this town is essentially small, rural, middle of nowhere, where the Walmart is the social hub.
mhm.
And I remember probably the second or third time we went with like, you know, at Thanksgiving, a big group of people. It actually wasn't Thanksgiving, it was like a couple weeks before Christmas. Because it wasn't a shopping thing, was not the motivator for the effect. But I made an offhand comment to my wife. How long do you think we'll be at the in-laws' place before someone suggests, hey, let's go to Walmart? Is it going to be an hour? Is it going to be 2 hours? How long does it take us to get bored with family at home before someone says this phrase? And it literally, I think there was a bowling alley somewhere too, but that's not as entertaining. And I
Wow.
guarantee you, sometime I think my bet was 2 hours. Within 2 hours of us being at this house with family,
Hmm.
someone was going to say, hey, let's go to Walmart or make a Walmart run for some knucklehead idea.
Right.
Like we need soda or we need
Some more
something.
chips
But
or yeah.
it's really more about we need a place to go that's not here.
Hmm.
And it's going to be, that's the suggestion. And that's where we're going to go.
It's kind of like going to the mall in the 80s.
And I won $5, by the way.
Wow, nice. Yeah, Highway 2. Yeah, Highway 2, which goes from like the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific through Bemidji. Um, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, we don't think of that as, I mean, it is kind of like a Route 66 thing, I suppose. Um, so yeah, it's but now Dollar Generals are everywhere, and that's Walmart, I guess. Uh,
Have you read any of the stuff on the effect of Dollar General?
mm-mm,
Because they apparently are, their business model is essentially a predatory one where we're going to put the store on the super fringe of a really poor neighborhoods,
mm-mm,
and we're going to exploit our workers and pay them ridiculously low hourly wages. And apparently they're quite often held up or robbed because they're in those neighborhoods
mm.
and they're not providing any help or security or support for their employees, which is compounding it. But then there's some other kind of financial chicanery they're doing to enrich their CEO at the expense of both their employees and the cities and little towns that they put them into, which may be why Walmart is starting to follow. I've heard some rumors that Walmart's starting to follow a little bit of that business model. Um, but I'd have to look it up. I don't think I bookmarked it, but I think
Oh, I guess I thought it.
ProPublica
All right.
ProPublica may have done some research and reporting on their.
Oh, it's the Turners. Yeah, it's not okay. I thought it was the Waltons as well. Yeah. So yeah, and also the place in my town that's always having trouble and can't, and gets robbed all the time or gets ripped off all the time because they've only got like one person ever working is CVS. So I don't know. But in any case, it's yeah, so
And they're not Dollar General stores anymore. Our local one jacked prices up to $1.50
yeah.
even before inflation hit
Hmm.
sometime about a year ago, I think.
Wow, 18,000 stores. Crazy. So, any last thoughts on the whole two sections that we're reading today. The Gini coefficient chart was interesting, although I don't put that much. I don't pay that much attention to the Gini number. I guess it's interesting.
Yeah, it's not what surprises me is I've heard it tangentially in a few places, but it's not a commonly discussed number, which I think is
yeah,
for something we should care more about, like in progressive society circles at least, the fact that we don't hear about it is a weird and concerning thing, I think.
Yeah, I think that the reason that I don't pay as much attention to it is that it's usually measured before taxes and transfers, and I'm more interested in the after taxes and transfers, which is the place where the U.S. really looks terrible. Okay, buddy, no, okay, go. This dog is like in and out, my little blind puppy.
Oh, I was kind of curious, because you've mentioned Thomas Frank a couple of times now, and I bookmarked a handful of things, but I'm curious if you or anyone else has read any of his work that relates to this that is more appropriate than others, or what you thought of it in relation to this.
Well, I really like The People Know, but he has written some other things.
And apparently his background is having grown up in Kentucky as a broadly conservative thinker who has now kind of crossed the middle, at least somewhat politically, into the left. But he is looking at and writing about kind of culture shifts in America that I think relate to a lot of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The populism piece of his work looks interesting, but I think some of the other books and articles he's written look more at some of the stuff we're talking about, but I have no experience with any of his work yet.
I have not looked at, it looks like Rendezvous with Oblivion is more recent than The People Know, it looks like. Yeah, the other book, and actually it's funny, I'm looking at Amazon right now, and what comes up, people who bought this also bought Pity the Billionaire, Listen Liberal, What's the Matter with Kansas, The Wrecking Crew, all Thomas Frank books, and then Matt Taibbi, Griftopia, which is also kind of interesting. At least in the sense that I must have highlighted it a lot because Readwise keeps feeding me Griftopia samples.
Well, that sounds like a clickbait kind of title too.
Griftopia, yeah, the subtitle is Bubble Machines, Vampire Squids, and what's the rest of it? The Long Con That Is Breaking America. So it's what you would expect, but it does have a lot of. He really got in. I think Matt Taibbi, the thing that I like the best about him is that he got into the weeds in 2008, 2009, during that era of actually, kind of looking at what was going on Wall Street, and and who was saying what, who was doing what. I thought that was a kind of a useful sort of moment. So the chronology, I'm not sure I understand the chronology of Thomas Frank's stuff. I think What's the Matter with Kansas was the first one, then Listen Liberal, then The People Know, and then this Rendezvous with Oblivion thing, Reports from a Sinking Society. I don't know, that might be a little too negative.
Yeah, we need to read something more uplifting after all of this.
Yeah, or we had also talked about, maybe bouncing back to something about note making, which, if we can wait long enough, Scott Shepard's magnum opus is due out in a month or so. Maybe Chris, you've seen it, right? Have you seen it?
He said December. I have a full draft dated and then maybe 2 months ago, and there's a lot there.
Maybe we can get him to give us some early ones and actually, publish out the, the videos. I mean, I don't know if he would think of that as a positive or a negative, but I could ask him.
We are kind of a critical bunch, so I don't know if it would
Yeah.
help or hurt.
Well, I already kind of feel that I'm on a similar page with him about, sort of analog note taking, or note making. I do, and I think he seems to be sort of beginning to mitigate some of the kind of strident tone.
Yeah.
Because I think he wants to be more of a statesman now. He changed his profile pic and stuff.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I just noticed this week too, the most recent newsletter. He's not wearing the Kangol cap backwards anymore. He's got
He's got
clean
the new glasses, the wire rims, and yeah.
He looks like Ryan Holiday's younger brother.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, he's finding
But I broadly I think I think one of my biggest criticisms of the early draft that I think he has done in terms of he's tightened it up a little. Some of it was a little windy and not as close to the point as some of it could have been. He doesn't go into as much history as I have done in some places, or at least in terms of research. I haven't written a lot of it out yet, but
you mean pre-Luhmann history?
Yeah, he does delve into a little bit of the history. He's read most of the stuff, the academic stuff about Luhmann to kind of clarify that stuff, which is, I think, not broadly or widely known. But he also goes a lot deeper into the kind of actual practices. And I think part of the issue with a lot of the space is there are a million one-page blog posts about how do you keep a Zettelkasten.
Right.
And
by people who've been doing it for a week.
And it's, by people who have really not done it at all. Even it's like I read somebody else's one-page blog post and now I'm going to write my own because that's the thing to do.
Because the algorithm is favoring it. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's interesting in this, everybody wants to nerd out on productivity, but by nerding out on productivity, you totally destroy your productivity, which is a weird issue.
Yeah.
But he has at least been doing this for a year and a half or 2 years, and he's actually used his own Zettelkasten to produce this output, which by itself is interesting. But he goes much more into the details of how to do it and a little bit of the why to do it, which I think he does, and he does it in a dramatically different way than Aaron's did or than you did, and in much more detail. So it's here's exactly how to make a numbering system that at least works for him and is, I think, broadly easier to understand than most of what people have been writing in forums about how to do numbering systems. Or how Luhmann's system, there are some quirks about what he was doing and why. And I think he had, there's a German filing number system that dates back at least to 1934. But in having looked at bits of it, it has broad parallels and ties to numbering systems in Germany and Austria that go back to the 1770s. In library catalogs, and oddly, a lot of it stems out of Austrian conscription numbers. So to support conscripting people in Austria into the war effort, they needed to know who people were, where they lived, and how many there were, and they created a numbering system to be able to say, "Hey, Joe, you need to report to the front lines." And track all their people so they could support the war effort, which is where these numbering systems come from. and that then got turned into an administrative thing in the German government and civil service. I don't know that I don't think he goes into some of that, but that's some of the weird, crazy reading I've done in the last year or two, which I find hilarious that, our note-taking systems and numbering systems for them go back to war efforts in the 1770s.
Well, or street numbering too, which is equally kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, and we don't notice in America because our street numbering systems here are dramatically different than they are in Europe. Like you actually need Google Maps or local knowledge of streets and housing numbers or block numbers to be able to get around.
Yeah.
But he goes into a lot more depth, I think. So if you're new to this, it becomes a fascinating thing. And I think he also does it in kind of an interesting, almost a circular way, and in part because it was written with a Zettelkasten, you can move around from one section to another and start in the middle of the book and read to the end and then circle back around to finish. And it all, it will all come together. So you don't need to start and read it linearly. You can kind of jump around and still both get the gist and understand what's happening, which I find fascinating.
Well, that sounds kind of promising.
You can't do that with a lot of books. And even I think up front, he says, if you're just starting this, like jump to chapter 12 and here's the list of details, do that first and then maybe come back and reread this. But it's kind of fascinating for that. But at the same time, it may also be kind of dull water for us to tread, because I think a lot of us have looked at things, maybe not quite to the depth he has. And you might find a few things in there that are interesting that you haven't seen or haven't experienced. But at the same time, it's going to be the type of book we would all read and say, it's our book, but we've seen so much of it already. It's not as interesting as it would have been without all of our experience.
Right. A couple of years ago. Yeah.
So we may not be the best test group for it. And there's a lot in it. It's a lot. I mean, it's, almost 600 pages. So
yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, Tim has said donut economics again, and I haven't looked at that yet. I'll kind of take a look at that, and also Tim has suggested maybe a week or two off in between might be a good idea, which I would probably be in favor of, because I'm coming up on the end of my semester, so I'll have research papers to read and thesis committees to sit on and stuff.
Or, how do we time it so that, the last couple weeks fall during the holidays when we've got quiet time to have read and caught up.
Yeah.
Although now's the time to start thinking about what the next thing is, so that.
Right. And yeah, so okay, well, we can talk about that. We've got one more week to kind of cover this, right? So next week, there's an appendix. Shall we kind of return to the pulling it together section and kind of the stuff that's in the appendix and have our last talk about this next week?
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up.
All right. Okay, cool. And and there are a bunch of things in the vault that kind of people have suggested. I voted a couple days ago. I voted for a couple.
Oh yeah, I need to go in and see what the list is and put some thumbs up or thumbs down.
Right.
Although
Okay.
I do like Donut Economics. I've read the first chapter.
Okay.
Last month, and it's a fascinating little thesis, I think.
Okay. Cool. Oh, somebody's responding to a tweet of mine in German. Well, that'll be interesting. Jürgen.
Oh yeah, Jürgen's been all over my feed this week. I got into a canoe with him somehow, and
Yep.
There's some big canoe with 15 people in it that's just two people are responding back and forth, and it's just destroyed my Twitter responses.
I signed up for Mastodon because I saw you were on it, Chris. But I haven't
Which one?
Mastodon.
Oh, yeah.
But I haven't done anything with it.
It's an interesting space. My favorite lately, if you're considering decamping, and I, am very close to doing it myself, although I have other options to go to that I've maintained for a long time. But there's a Twitter-like service called micro.blog that's really good. I think it's a $5 a month subscription, and it's set up in such a way, it's a very open web solution, and it works and has functionality like Twitter, but is also set up for kind of longer form blogging and newsletters and kind of all the things. So depending on what you already have or what you want out of it, you can put something into it to get what you want out of it. So it's a much more free-form, flexible thing, but it also allows you to syndicate stuff to Twitter or Mastodon if you want. And I think there's ways even to get responses back so that if somebody replies to you on Mastodon, you'll see the reply come back to you on this platform.
Oh, that would be cool.
I'm an uncommon user in that I already have a website that acts as a social hub.
Right.
So I can syndicate things into that community and communicate back and forth as if we were all on the same platform, which is stupidly fascinating to me. But to do that, you need to get at least a little bit into the weeds of what it's doing and how it works to make that an easy thing. But they've got, mobile applications for most of the platforms for, short tweet like things, photos. It's a fun and interesting community that I think probably the two things that distinguish it, there are no likes and no retweets. And no algorithmic feed. So it's a much quieter, calmer place to be. People are much nicer to each other as a result. You can follow others and how many you're following, but other than responses you get back from people, you have no idea who's following you at all. So you're not incentivized for numbers, or acceleration of posts and whatever. And it tends to be more organic, holistic conversations as a result. So if you want to like somebody's post, you literally have to type, I really love this, and respond that way.
Cool.
Rather than retweeting it with some comment or whatever. So it's a lot healthier space to be, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But it also does what Twitter does, but I think so much more on top of it. So
and it's $5 a month. So that weeds out a lot of so it's got to be completely bot free.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I think I may have a free invitation thing if you want to try it out for a month or something. Somewhere I've got one because I've been on it almost since day one when he designed it 2-3 years ago. So it's also been around for a while. So they've got most of the big kinks worked out. And the other benefit too is all the things you put into it, you own. So if you ever decide to leave, you have all the data and can kind of take it with you and do with it what you want. So it's the amount of work and engineering they went into doing this is a whole lot more and a whole lot more thoughtful than any other social network I've ever seen. So
cool.
And it's a very responsive, it's a team of like 3 or 4 people. So they tend to be incredibly responsive to what's happening and what people want out of it. So
cool. All right. Yeah, I'll take a look at it.
But I'm worried more that everybody leaves. I've seen some early numbers and somewhere in the range of like 30 or 40,000 people have moved to Mastodon in the last day
Wow.
or two, which are big numbers, but not the crazy mass exodus. I expected the numbers to be 3 times that, or at least people testing the waters. Like,
Hmm.
if I have to go, where do I go, and what does that look like? But the
Right.
problem becomes the network effects of, do enough people test the waters and leave and spend time somewhere else to make it worth it to leave Twitter?
Right.
Um, you know, Kanye's back apparently, and I'm like, okay, that's not a good sign for the Cheeto in chief.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that, I mean, I'm not at all, I don't care one way or the other about that. I have sort of, I think, minimized that. I've told Twitter enough times I don't want to see, I want to see less of that, that I think they've, kind of gotten the picture. But
Yeah.
it's I don't know. I don't, I just feel my feeling with Twitter is that I think there's I think that what I'm getting out of it and what I'm using it for is completely it's I'm just like a free rider on this bus that's going somewhere else, um,
Yeah.
or a hitchhiker or something. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens. It does. I mean, it's nice that people are still trying to.
What do you, I'm curious what you get more value out of, that or YouTube or Substack or something else altogether.
Um,
Which one,
I
if you could only keep one, what would you keep?
probably Substack now. Oh, Kitty wants to play. Um, Probably Substack, because I'm trying to do more. I'm trying to push more stuff out there. So I've just queued up a bunch of stuff in Substack to start, kind of dropping, on a daily, more or less basis. Um, and I don't think that, and I can, I have a Vimeo account again, so I don't really need YouTube. And I don't know that, if I leave YouTube, I don't know that I lose, I lose some people who are, who are following me on it, but I'm not sure that makes me invisible to them if I have, some other ways of letting people know that I've dropped something. I don't know.
Yeah.
See.
It's all about the email list.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, I've been doing this long enough that I've had, email lists and, and I've had my own websites and blogs on my, on websites that I hosted myself. I've never actually gone to the extent of having a server in my garage or something that was actually serving this stuff.
Yeah.
I've always used an ISP, but and I kind of, that was kind of cool, back when people actually used to, have, I mean, I know, you probably do a lot with RSS, but I haven't been lately because it's just, it just seems like there's not that much. It's not what it used to be.
Yeah. Well, there are more things out there to allow you to pull in feeds from things that don't even have RSS feeds anymore, which is nice. So I use it for that.
Mm-hmm.
The issue becomes curating your RSS feeds, and I have thousands that are still active.
Mm-hmm.
But it's doing that in a way that makes it easy to read. But I also now tend to, for the last 6 months or more, I have moved towards and tend to read. I'm way more selective about the social media income and reading. And I tend to read a whole lot more journal articles and books and long form things.
Yeah.
And I rely way less on social media as a thing.
Yeah. It's weird. I just I just re-upped for Readwise, and I got in a little email chat with them, and they're sending me a sweatshirt or something. But they also got me onto Reader, and so I've been, and so that's actually why I've been thinking about RSS again. I was like, I could start to,
No, having
aggregate some stuff there, but I haven't done it yet.
having a kind of a centralized place to subscribe and read everything, regardless of where it's coming from, is an interesting and a useful experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there aren't a lot of really great places that do it or do it well or do it in kind of a logical, pretty manner. So it's, if you subscribe to an RSS feed for a YouTube thing and for a Twitter feed separately or an Instagram feed. In fact, all of my Instagram watching and viewing is all through RSS lately for the last 2 years. And I like that setup way better than Instagram's direct thing. I get a whole lot less ads and I spend a lot less time looking at crap.
Right.
I actually have a view where I can see like, here's the 30 posts a day all my friends made in just a big picture, and then I can look at one or two of them up close. Oh, that's interesting, and then move on rather than scrolling for days for things I don't care about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There used to be a thing. Remember a couple of years ago, there was a thing that made something that looked like a newsletter, and it would aggregate stuff. You could subscribe to things that would aggregate stuff from all over the place. And yeah,
I do miss kind of went away, and it kind of kills me. But there was a thing called Nuzzle that you could put in. I put in a few Twitter lists I had, and set a threshold of like, I think 5. So things had to have either 5 likes or 5 retweets is a minimum threshold. So if you were in my network and you liked or retweeted something, it counted towards that. And literally every time I looked at it, it was kind of the best of what I was going to really ever care about from Twitter that day. So I could not go to Twitter because this did a lot of the filtering work to take crap out.
Right.
And what was there was 100% interesting to me. And I could do that for 3 minutes and find 4 articles and go read them and not scroll for 3 hours to have found those same stupid articles and seen all the other crap that I really could have done without.
Right. Yeah. Who bought and killed that?
I don't remember offhand. I want to say Twitter or somebody may have bought it to do something with, and then it was an acqui-hire, and then they just shut the whole thing down.
Yeah, it doesn't even come up on Google anymore.
Was it Nuzzle, L-E or E-L? I don't remember.
That might make a difference.
I do have a source that'll tell me. My internet is so slow here for some reason. I don't know what's going on.
Oh yeah, okay. EL, News Monitoring and Research. Oh, it's got a.
And I think it was built and designed originally by one of the first couple of engineers at Tumblr. So they knew who they were, and they were really good at doing it.
Yep. Yeah, it's a dead. It's a Twitter handle with a dead link to a website. Anyway, it's noon. We gotta probably cut this off. So yeah, let's maybe I'll contact Scott and see if we could get some pre-release access, or if maybe he might just shut that down. But I'll ask, and then I'll take a look at the donut as well.
Oh, so Nuzzle got bought out by Scroll, and then Scroll got bought out by Twitter. So that's what happened.
All right. Yeah. Hopefully. Hopefully some of the people running the things that we now like will be able to stay independent for longer.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, folks.
All right. Good
See you,
talking
Dan.
with you. Take care.